I have mentioned on a number of occasions in my coursebooks that perhaps the most important thing for an inner alchemist is the accumulation of more and more energy. It is only with an increase in power that all things become possible for them, or for anyone. I have tried to also define what this increase in power boils down to, from a more objective point of view, by stating that an increase in energy basically means that as an inner alchemist gains more and more power, they are able to focus more precisely, more relentlessly in a sustained way, and finally that it is this ability to focus in a relentless way that allows such a practitioner to literally perform the rationally impossible, to transmute matter, themselves, and eventually escape the gravity of this binding human world and object-like existence. But I have also mentioned in those books that linear time is an illusion, that our perception of time as being a straight line from a present back to a past, or forward into a future, is an illusion in a greater sense, because beyond the constraints and the limits of physicality and our human beliefs about the nature of reality, all time exists now, at this moment, all at once. I have mentioned repeatedly that from the direct energetic perceptions of inner alchemists, which might be termed seeing, time is not linear and sequential, but it is instead a kind of massive and present moment that has an ever-expanding thickness that cannot be explained in rational and linear terms. But if this is the case, if all time is now and not sequential, then how is it that alchemists acquire energy over time? There seems to be this incompatible, impossible, rational contradiction. If an alchemist strives endlessly for something that they acquire over time, how is this possible if sequential time is an illusion? If all time is now, then wouldn't it be the case that all energy is now as well? Why the struggle then? How is this possible if there is no real future in a greater sense? This is a very good question, and the answer has to do with dimensional laws, and it is honestly a very difficult question to answer from the human perspective, that is the general human understanding of space and time. I have tried to explain this before by saying that our future is set in a way, meaning that a probable future has the potential to be, and being that all time is now, this future is already happening, it is happening now, along with the present and the past that we believe created that future, that whole, all time, an entire timeline is now. One could say in that sense, in order to try and explain this question, that at this moment we have all the energy that we'll ever need to become seers, alchemists, immortals, or whatever is potentially possible for us. I could say then that the acquisition of energy, of power, is not about building something in a factory, sort of like building this from that, but that instead gaining more energy means opening ourselves, truly opening ourselves to greater awareness and possibility, such as the possibility that all time is now. Opening ourselves up to the realization therefore that all the energy that we could ever need is ours now, if we are only able to truly know in a direct energetic way, that all time is now and therefore all energy is here now and available to us, is the true challenge of humanity. But how does this happen? Well, as I have said, it happens through an expansion of awareness, and this can start by at the very least trying to understand how, in an intellectual way, all time and all energy could be now. Such an attempt at intellectual expansion is a true projection, and this can launch an individual into deep exploration and freedom from the constraints of the three-dimensional cube. To do this, I must explain the nature of time according to inner alchemists and how it is that such perceptions might be understood from a human perspective, knowing full well that the words that I must use are bound to a rational sequential order by their very nature. But it is my hope that in making this attempt I can entice your mind to expand itself, stretch the limits of itself, in order to make such a realization and new roads possible, available. I could therefore start by saying that many possibilities exist within every timeline, many timelines exist. It isn't that we could in a future do this or that, but instead it is the case that, at least in accordance with the direct energetic perceptions of inner alchemists, complete other possible timelines are coming into existence at every moment point, at every here and now moment point. And each one of those complete timelines exists now. Each timeline, once formed, is complete from beginning to end, having what from the human perspective would be a complete past and a whole new fully formed future, instantly. And while the formation, the creation, of each timeline would seem to imply a sequential order, being that new timelines seem to be created as future progresses, this is not the case, being that the past, from the human perspective, is creating new timelines as well as the present and the future, Every point of the timeline is creating new timelines. The whole of existence is growing, expanding with an organic kind of thickness that defies most current accepted human ideas about space and time. In order to try to explain the nature of this expansion beyond space and time, which might be better termed transmutation in some sense, I could add further that each timeline is not set in stone, that is, each timeline is set and exists as a complete thing, as it were, but it has within every moment point, as I mentioned earlier, the potential to fork yet again, in new directions, and each moment point, whether it is in the past, the present or the future, from the point of view of a human observer, let's say, this established timeline has the potential to spontaneously change and create new alternatives, new possibilities, in what that observer would judge to be the present, the future, or the past. This is so because the world, all worlds, require spontaneity in order to grow and truly expand. Spontaneity is absolutely necessary for any system, any dimension. Without spontaneous action, no growth, true individuality, or freedom is possible. So, spontaneity is the only dimensional law that could be said to be a truly universal law, meaning that in a small or large way it is part of all existence, of all that is. And thanks to that spontaneity, and being that all time is simultaneous, each probable outcome is exercised, and it is finished at the moment of its inception completely. All existence is like a magnificent burst of being, that occupies no space or time, and yet it separates itself and takes on new challenges, that could be called dimensional separations and dimensional laws that allow for even greater and more diverse growth. This separation and growth are not a function of space as we might perceive it as human beings, but it is instead a differing in how we might scale thoughts in our mind, and just like that separation and organization of thought takes up no space and yet somehow imposes its own inner structure, such a separation by all that is of itself is not spatial. It will only be perceived as a separation by an awareness trapped within the binding forces of that separation. But this is, as I have said, an illusion of that bound awareness within that dimension. So, spontaneity and growth are not a matter of linear time but are instead more akin to the spontaneous bursts that are experienced during the height of creativity, and their development within any dimension, even this dimension, means that they are instantly brought forth with an intensity that ensures their relative survival and duration in accordance with that intensity, which means that the intensity of any particular creative burst ensures and dictates its relative length of existence in accordance to the laws that govern any particular dimension. For example, what this means is that in our human dimension, where we separate a past and a future in sequential order, the intensity of a spontaneous burst is perceived as a length of duration, how long something lasts. The more intensity, the longer it lasts, the longer the past of it and the future of it, and the more impact that it may have in shaping and changing the things within this dimension. The aspect of ourselves that we refer to as an individuality is growing, that is, it is developing greater and greater intensity, and this intensity we refer to as power, or one could say that the individuality that we are, is uncovering the true intensity that is its birthright, the intensity that was, is, and continues to be its inheritance, which was given it at the point of its inception, its creation. While at the same time it is through spontaneity, which is the nature of all existence, expanding in all ways, now. And in doing so contributing to the complexity and intensity of that totality of all creation, so that this individuality is, and when it is being itself perfectly, it is quite naturally transmuting itself into greater being, which can be termed increasing energy, increasing power, increasing intensity, or transmutation power, which as humans we may term growth. But again, this growth is not linear. It just seems linear from the physical human dimension in accordance with the laws of this dimension and the physical senses that we use to perceive within it. We grow because it is the mandate of all existence, the mandate of heaven as I have termed it in my coursebook, the way of the Death Defier. But our growth from our point of view is slow and methodical, linear, because of the fact that we may not be able to see past the physical illusion and due to this limitation, not be able to see and work with the true nature of reality. Each moment for us is like a long eternity or very fleeting moment point. Time is relative depending on our moment point within the bounding laws of this dimension. Being bound to the laws of this dimension means that we perceive the utter intensity of being as a sequential movement across space and time because of a buffer, a software and hardware cushion called physicality, that allows our senses to perceive time in a more sequential but relative manner, in order for us to understand the complexities of time and existence in a slower, more predictable way. And this gives us a relatively safe and relatively predictable and, dare I say it, simple place to start to evolve as we do so. Such a sequential order to things, such a causal structure to how things are and develop is therefore an illusion, a fine little safe space for us to become and evolve, and it is for the most part a required illusion that is meant to give us a fine nest to allow us to begin to understand the complexities and the power inherent within our individuality and all that is. Each moment is a complete moment that has within it all possible futures, and this is important, all possible pasts as well. At each one of those moment points there is spontaneity, meaning that at each moment point in what we may perceive as being the future or the past, new moment points are created in a fashion that could only be referred to as organic. When we accumulate energy, we are really accumulating intensity, and this intensity has the possibility to go in many spontaneous directions at any moment point, in accordance with the relative power of that intensity. This guarantees evolution and growth, and it allows for the developing individuality to learn to work with energy, which is intensity, which in this particular dimension, from the human rational point of view, develops for the most part through slow and progressive order in what we imagine to be one direction only, which is forward in time. So, the reason for the duality, the contradiction, between having to work on developing energy, while at the same time having all the energy that we need in accordance with whatever timeline we are pursuing, being that all time and space are here now, has everything to do with the creation of a development safe space, world, dimension, for the individuality to grow in a particular direction. We are where we are, and we perceive as we do because we are here to evolve, and to evolve in a particular manner in accordance with the constraints of this dimension. Each dimension is bound by certain laws in a way. Ours is expressed in our fleshliness, our bodies, which are created to exist in a certain kind of environment and are endowed with certain physical senses that can only perceive the nature of existence in a certain limited way. We are here to evolve, to transmute ourselves, our individuality within the bounds of this dimension first, and as we do so, we see new openings that were not there before, from our point of view, that allow us to travel into other dimensions that can show us different versions of that same reality in more and more expanded ways, in other dimensions that may have different laws, that may express intensity in different ways. Time and space are an illusion of this dimension and of the furniture, you might say, that can be found within this dimension, and all of this furniture and illusion are here to help us all evolve in a direction that can then open up new dimensions and other potentials for growth. What we call the trials of effort and growth are in essence spontaneous expansion through the fine-tuning of that which is our true self, and it all boils down to our ability to become more ourselves as we learn to work with energy. Certainly, such statements about how inner alchemists perceive time might bring up other questions about the nature of personal human reality, such as, if time is not linear, if it is not sequential, could human life be understood as having sequential memories but not that the events of this life occurred sequentially? And the answer to this is simply yes. For us humans, this is what happens all the time. Existence is from a physical perspective, using the physical senses, seemingly linear, but as some studies have pointed out, the senses are flawed in many ways in that they miss a great deal, and what they do perceive is later changed in the brain in order to make it more accessible not only to the physical brain itself, but also to the beliefs of the times as well. So, to us we do have sequential memories because we can't perceive the past directly nor can we perceive the future directly. Our past and our future are not here in our present, but we say we remember a past and infer a future, and deny or allow ourselves the ability to perceive one or the other, in accordance with what we believe to be true. In other words, the dogma of the times has a great influence on how we perceive time. It is not just the physical senses but also our dogmatic beliefs that shape the nature of our reality. In a rational world the past is set, and the future is probable. But beyond the 5 physical senses there is more to perceive, and the illusion of sequential linear order and causality falls early on, being that the stability of those past memories and the great chaotic probability of the future take on new nuance, as one can discover in looking into any reliable and truly open and fair study of precognition and trance induction. So, the buffer of physicality allows us to have sequential memories, in a universe where linear time is an illusion, or another way to say this simply is to say that linear sequence is an illusion of the human physical senses and the belief structures of the time. From a Cartesian perspective, we, in accordance with our possible dogmatic beliefs, might say that the mind is one thing and separate from the body, as Descartes pointed out to some degree. The physical body and the senses perceive one kind of time while the mind perceives another, being that there can be what we refer to as physical time and psychological time. In accordance with that one possible definition of Cartesian belief, we now in the modern world say that physical time is real while psychological time is an illusion and or a delusion. And as such we bind ourselves to this one small box we call true objective reality. Inner alchemists see, through direct energetic perception, that the mind is not separate from the body but that there are instead gradations of it. The physical self exists in one-dimensional location, while other parts of that self that are not physical exist in others. What this means is that to inner alchemists the totality of each and every person occupies different dimensional locations. We are all born inherently multidimensional, and each and every person therefore has the inherent ability to grow and evolve beyond a reality where time is linear and physically hard objects rule their existence. But for that to happen, the key, the door, to those other dimensional locations must be found and opened, and the only way to do that is to have a bridge. The mind is that bridge. Its fine gradations means that part of the mind is closer to the physical here, while other parts are closer to that non-physical somewhere over there, that other unmeasurable, non-local over there. For the inner alchemist the mind is the bridge. It is not, as some have postulated, a separate delusion or an outgrowth of the body. For these seers the mind is the mind that can connect, all the parts of the totality of each and every person. So, unlike what some Cartesians might believe, the mind is not separate from the body. It is instead, at least according to inner alchemists, a link, a bridge, full of fine gradations that connects many dimensional locations. It is in essence the ghost in the machine, and it is the key to our evolution, our transmutation. If you would like to know more about time, space, and personal transmutation, in accordance with the perceptions of inner alchemists, I will leave a link to the above-mentioned coursebooks in the video description below.